Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Drury and Friends College Football Show. Happy holidays, everyone. It is December 25th. Some people celebrate this as Christmas. If you do, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, Happy Hanukkah, if you choose to celebrate that way. I'm Ben Drury, as you can see down there, and I am the host of this show. On today's episode, it will just be me, but on occasional episodes, it will be Drury and Friends, as the title suggests, where some of my friends, guests will come on and we'll discuss college football. Now, we're at a little bit of a weird situation right now in the college football season. Now, if you cover or if you watch the sport at all, are a fan of the sport, you know that it's a little bit weird around the New Year's. We flip to playing games on Saturdays, Fridays, and Saturdays to flipping them to play them during the week. Now, that gives us a special opportunity. So as we sit here today, we're roughly a week away from the first quarterfinal games. So we'll have more traditional game previews a little bit later and closer to the games. But on today's episode, we're going to focus a little bit more on those previous first round games and truly just get back into the details, break down some of those games, and give first thoughts, first reactions to those upcoming quarterfinal matchups. Now, the first matchup we had of the whole weekend, the first matchup of the whole college football playoff, was Alabama versus Oklahoma. And this was a matchup that has been played before, so we kind of knew what to expect heading into the matchup. Now, but we didn't get necessarily what we got the first time. Oklahoma came out blazing early on. They get out to a 17-0 lead early on in the game. And what a lot of people have been saying, including myself, I picked Oklahoma to win and to probably win by a touchdown plus because leading into this matchup, Alabama had not been able to do anything offensively and they were leaking oil, as a lot of people have been saying. So early on in the first quarter, it looked like this game was going exactly to script based on how the two teams have been playing up until this point. However, Alabama didn't give up. A lot of people have been saying that first quarter just looked like the fifth quarter of the SEC championship game against Georgia, where Alabama lost 28-7. But the difference is that Ty Simpson, like he said, he played like a wolf, and he brought his team back depths of a 17-0 deficit and brought his team back to win. Now, how they did this was they had amazing explosive plays, and they had played with a lot of poise. Now, what does this come down to? Now, Alabama has some of the best recruits in the country. They have one of the most talented rosters in, NCAA FBS football, and there's no doubt about that. Is that because Kalen DeBoer is a good recruiter, or just because of the name Alabama is on those jerseys? That's not for me to decide. However, they used these weapons, whether it be Ryan Williams, or we'll get into a little bit, Latsier Brooks, who is a freshman, and he popped off in this game. This was his coming out party. People have been saying that he's a special wide receiver like no one's seen in a while at Alabama, and he truly, truly showed it. But where Alabama flipped the script and played with poise was finding that explosiveness. And they were able to do what they haven't been able to do for the past couple weeks, as they used those tools, they used those weapons to the best of their advantage, to the best of their ability, and truly, truly exploded on those and capitalized on those moments. Now, like I said, Sooners jumped out to a 17-0 lead early in the second quarter, and one of the things I love about the college football playoff, the new system, is that games are played on home fields. And this was a moment where if Alabama let the Oklahoma crowd stay in it for too long, Alabama would be riding themselves out. And Norman got rocking. Norman was rocking. It was a rocking place to play, like it normally is. But up 17-0, those Sooner fans were getting loud, and Alabama felt it. But, like I said, the second part of that two-part equation leading to that comeback was that poise. And that comes from Ty Simpson. Ty Simpson hasn't played the best football the past couple weeks. And, compared to earlier in the season where some people were riding him as a Heisman favorite, he only had one touchdown through the early stages of the season. And that kind of went down the drain in the past couple weeks. However, After that first quarter of that game against Oklahoma, he flipped the script like the rest of the Alabama roster did, and he contained his composure. He threw for 232 passing yards, 2 touchdown passes, and he was a steady presence during that comeback. Now, obviously, a good football team starts at those captain positions and at those top players, and that is the quarterback position, and that is what Ty Simpson did in this game. Now, Latsier Brooks, he's a freshman. I already said his name a little bit earlier, but in this game, he had 5 receptions, just 5 receptions, but he had 79 yards, and he had 2 touchdowns. Now, the thing with Latsier Brooks is that he gave Alabama the spark that they needed in crucial moments of this game, providing explosive plays when he needed them. Now, it's impossible to make a good comeback whenever your defense is still allowing a sizable amount of points on the other side of the ball. Now, Alabama did not let that happen. And that started with linebacker Xavier Brown, who had an interception turned into a pick six, which truly just flipped the momentum of this game, which is momentum. I'm a big proponent. I'm a big believer that momentum is the one key thing that a football team or any team in sports or anyone needs to have success. And Alabama had momentum in this game, and they just let that snowball into more and more points and ending up with a win. Now, it's easy to just kind of reflect on this and say, oh, Alabama just had an incredible game and Oklahoma just couldn't keep up. But that wasn't necessarily the case. Now, like I said, Oklahoma got out to an early 17-0 lead, but Alabama was able to limit Oklahoma's weapons. And that started with John Mateer. A lot of people say, oh, John Mateer just hasn't been the same since he got injured. That hand surgery, Red River rivalry, he just hasn't been the same, especially before that when he was being listed as a Heisman favorite as well, if not the top by multiple levels. And John Mateer, he had more passing yards than Ty Simpson, which makes sense, especially with the defense play that Alabama was playing. But he puts up 307 passing yards. But the key thing, like I said, momentum, is that John Mateer threw an interception when it truly mattered most, something that you can't afford to have if you were Oklahoma. And watching this game, it was rough. The last few drives where Oklahoma had the keys to succeed. If they could have just gone down, if they put points on that board, they could have been back in this game and make it close to a field goal game instead of a 10-point game, which the final score shows. But that comes down to John Mateer. He wasn't as composed in the pocket. He was rolling out, which he does. He's a scrambling quarterback. However, he just could not decide what to do with the ball to the point where he would just run aimlessly and just throw it out of bounds, wasting 15 to 20 seconds of a play when nothing happened. And in fact, they lost some downs when really he could have just ran and got that first down or at least gotten some forward momentum. But it's not just John Mateer's fault. Oklahoma's wide receivers also did not pay him any favors whatsoever. There were a lot of dropped passes, but in the moments that it mattered most, truly crucial, life or death situations, and they just could not catch the ball. And another thing was there was just a random fumbled punt. And guys, football is a three-headed monster, right? There's 3 phases of the game: offense, defense, and special teams. And sometimes special teams is just like shooting free throws in basketball. They're free for a reason, right? Sometimes people think special teams is easy, making a field goal is easy. And if you think that way, and I bet a lot of those people on that special teams unit on any team probably feel the same way. But you got to get the job done, and you got to do it well. But that was not the case here. Fumbled punt, you just can't have those things. And truly, Alabama played well, but really, Oklahoma was not doing themselves any favors, right? You want to make a team have to beat you, and that's what truly makes a team great. And Oklahoma was just given the keys to the kingdom. Like, here, come take our field, please. 50 Cent is going to give you more motivation than it does, and we're the home team. We are supposed to be hard to kill, but we're just giving you the lethal dosage. So that's one game. That was one, the first round matchup. And the second one, the Drury and Friends College Football Show is powered by the Numbers ranking system. We use a lot of the by the Numbers ranking system data, outputs, predictions to fuel some of the ways I predict games or talk about them. And this was a matchup that the BTN got completely wrong. BTN by the Numbers. And leading into this matchup, I can't remember what the spread was exactly, but I think Ole Miss was just favored by 6.5 points. And since then, I've actually made some tweaks to the formula. So it would probably be a little bit different, but not much more than a 3-point swing. And Ole Miss went out there and won by 31. Right? And this is just another thing. I'm not going to harp too much on it because so many people talk about it. But the group of 5 in the college football playoff, do they deserve to be there? I don't think so. And I didn't form that opinion because of this result to this game. But they just didn't deserve to be in that field. If we're deciding to pick the 12 teams who are the best teams in the country, how in the world is Tulane and James Madison supposed to be in there? Now, I will say the BTN had James Madison and Tulane in the top 12, but it's wrong. It's just a number system. It's just a ranking system, so it can't get everything right. Now, but there are some things that kind of come down to the final score, and obviously, there's going to be a lot about, there's a lot to talk about beyond the final score. And just some quick things that pop off the page is that Ole Miss controlled the game. And that is one thing that you can look at the, final box score and the score, and you can completely see that, and it makes completely and utter sense. But how they did this was just momentum. Winning the momentum game is all that it takes, especially when you're playing a team like Tulane, where these teams come in and everyone is doubting them and everyone is saying, oh, you shouldn't be here. You're a group of 5. Your coach is about to leave. The majority of your players are probably going to leave and follow that coach, if not getting recruited by another Power 4 conference. And sometimes the teams like that, if they get a touchdown early on, an interception, a fumble, a turnover, they can be the thing. That can be the thing that truly, truly could make this box score and this final score so lopsided. And maybe Ole Miss would still win, but it could be 1 or 2 touchdown game. But Tulane, any team most of the time of this caliber, Tulane is still a decently good team, but they just didn't have anything to give. They didn't have anything to say for themselves after the first quarter. And like I said, the momentum started early for Ole Miss. Touchdown was scored just 59 seconds into the game. 59 seconds. Kewan Lacey, who I'm a Missouri Tigers fan, and to see him playing well for Ole Miss, props to you. If you guys don't know, Kewan Lacey, transfer running back from Mizzou. Obviously, I'm not that sore about it because we got Ahmad Hardy, who I think got snubbed of the best running back award in the country, the Doak Walker. But this isn't the Ahmad Hardy show. This isn't the Missouri Tigers show. We're talking about teams who are still playing for hardware besides the Gator Bowl trophy. And early on, Ole Miss just leveraged mismatches. There are going to be mismatches in a game like this where you have a lot of people have said that it's not a matter of one team being more deserving than the other. It's just that group of 5 teams are not playing the same sport as Ole Miss. That's just the fact of the matter. Whether it be resources, the amount of money a team gets, or how good their recruiting is, stuff like that. It's bonkers. If you look at Oregon, Dan Lanning's salary, we'll talk about the James Madison Oregon game a little bit later, but Dan Lanning's budget, his salary every year is $11 million. James Madison's NIL fund is $1 million every year. $10 million more for just a coach, not even just for the players, but for the coach's salary. That's the stakes that we're playing at. Group of 5 and Power 4 aren't on the same level, and that's why they shouldn't be playing on the same level in a college football playoff. That's the last I'll say about this. Another player that I think has also gotten snubbed from a lot of credit is quarterback Trinidad Chambliss for Ole Miss. We always hear about the transfer portal stories that go incredibly well. And most of the time it's starting at, a low major college football FBS program, and then they go to, a mid-major program, do well there, and then they continue rising the ranks. Now, the thing with Trinidad Chambliss, he was in D2 football last year. Ferris State, and balling out there too. And he comes to Ole Miss. He was the backup quarterback. He gets put in there after an Austin Simmons injury, and he's just been playing amazing all year long. I don't get how he hasn't gotten more Heisman credit. Obviously, the Heisman Trophy ceremony is long gone, but just not see him on people's ballots. People just don't know about him much. And in the Sugar Bowl, they're truly going to get to know Trinidad Chambliss. Now, Trinidad had 318 total yards. He had 3 touchdowns, and 2 of those were rushing touchdowns. That's truly what he brings to the field. Oftentimes, I've kind of thought about it this way, where his archetype kind of reminds me of Lamar Jackson just a little bit, where he's an incredible runner, but he can also, and we say this a lot of times, but he's incredibly good, if not better, at rushing than passing the ball. And that doesn't happen that often. However, he's still really, really good at passing the ball. And that just speaks volumes about how good Trinidad Chambliss is. Now, to hold a team to 10 points on any level, even whenever you put your subs in the fourth quarter, is saying something. And that's what Ole Miss did. Defensive dominance was how they did this. 3 forced turnovers. They had 1 interception, 2 fumbles. And on these turnovers, it converted to 17 points for Ole Miss. And the only touchdown that was allowed was a garbage time touchdown. I'm a big basketball fan, and it's like whenever you're up 50 points and then you put all your subs in, and then the other team brings their kid at the bottom of the bench, the walk-on kid, and he comes in and scores a 3-pointer, and everyone is going flipping nuts. It's the same thing. Does that score for him matter that much? I wouldn't say so. That's why it's called garbage time. And that's how Tulane scored. In the closing minutes to get 10 points. And, make the losing margin look horrible to slightly less horrible. Horrible nonetheless. That's enough for that game. This was the last game on Saturday, and we'll get to the first game of Saturday after this. But another group of 5 matchup. 51-34 was the final score between Oregon and James Madison, the 5-12 game. And I will say, this is one that the BTN got right. Well, not really. It had Oregon favored by a 0.5 point. And that's including home field favorability. So if it was on a neutral field, James Madison would be favored, which, frankly, I don't really get. I created the number system, but sometimes I don't understand what it says. However, knowing that Oregon was only picked to favored by only that much, I knew that there was a good, like very high probability of James Madison covering that 21.5 spread. Some people have been saying, they could win this game. I didn't necessarily go that far, but I knew they would cover. Now, this is kind of a similar story to Ole Miss, to the Ole Miss-Tulane game. Oregon got off to a fast start. Touchdowns on the first 5 possessions, 34-6 lead at halftime, with, a big play coming from Dante Moore after a 41-yard one-handed touchdown pass to Jamari Johnson. Now, Dante Moore had an incredible game. 19 of 27 in passing, 313 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and 1 rushing touchdown. And he controlled the game with precision and explosiveness. And it also speaks to the skill position standouts, and there's one for each team. Malik Benson on Oregon had 5 catches, 119 yards, with 2 touchdowns. On the opposite side of the ball was Wayne Knight of James Madison. He has 17 carries, 110 yards with 1 touchdown. And against a top-tier defense that Oregon has, that's good. That's really, really good. If I'm Wayne Knight and if I'm Bob Chesney, who's now the UCLA head coach, formerly the James Madison coach, I would be reflecting on that and be very pleased. And as we're looking at this score, I'm just thinking to myself, how on earth did Oregon let James Madison put up 34 points on them? Oregon does put up 51, but allowing 34 is not the best thing to be seen on your resume, especially going up against Texas Tech, who has a pretty good, not the most explosive offense, but it will wither you down. And combined with its awesome defense, it will do damage and it will win them games. But like I said, in the second half alone, James Madison won the game. James Madison put up 11 more points than Oregon did in the second half. They won that game in the second half. 28-17 was the second half margin. And QB Alonzo Barnett III for James Madison, the Dukes, had 273 passing yards with 3 total touchdowns. However, once again, are these garbage time scores? Yes. Yes. But I would say this is the equivalent of, like I said, to talk about basketball again, would be whenever you put your subs in, and then they put their subs in, and then they start withering down that lead. And you start to sweat a little bit on the bench, but not really like I'm not really too worried about losing this game. But also, how are they putting up this many points against us? Just some food for thought. Special teams had a great impact in this game. There's a blocked field goal by Tion Gray, a blocked punt by Blake Purchase, and there was a punt return 15 yards for a touchdown by Jaden Lamar. Dan Lanning, he's a very, I don't know what the right word would be for this, but very outspoken. He's a very outspoken coach, whether it be talking about SEC scheduling, like why is a team playing Chattanooga State in 2 weeks until the end of the season. And he actually got a t-shirt from that school, which they don't have a football team, but they have a basketball team. So nice try, Dan Lanning. But he was very unhappy with the second half execution, just like I've outlined, very worthily so. Dan Lanning, good call. However, Oregon gets to go on and play again. They play Texas Tech. We'll talk a little bit about that later on in the show. And for James Madison, their season's over. And honestly, I would not be surprised to see, Alonzo Barnett maybe playing on, a top-tier college football program next year. Bob Chesney departs. He'll take over the UCLA program. He already has. And Billy Napier, Group of 5, legendary coach. He didn't really do that good at Florida, but he's back in the Group of 5 ranks. He's taking on James Madison. Now, the final game of what we're talking about here today, it was actually the second game of the weekend, but just to kind of spread out the actually good games, well, I actually don't even know if this game was that good. It was 10-3, and your first thought would be, oh, this was a defensive battle for the ages. And you're partially right, but it also came down to Miami missing multiple field goals. I think they missed 3 field goals. That's 9 points they could have had up on the board. This game could be a comfortable lead for them, but they just missed the field goals. Once again, it's like free throws, man. Obviously, I wouldn't be saying this if I got picked to kick the Pat McAfee field goal contest, because I've never said a bad thing about a kicker in my life. I promise. I have. That was a joke. But, like I said, you got to make the field goals. If that's your one job, we got to make those. Especially if you're Miami, where you're definitely a fringe team when it comes to being a college football playoff championship contender. And truly, it came down to this. Malachi Toney, he's a freshman for Miami, and he had the game-winning moment. He had an 11-yard touchdown catch with under 2 minutes remaining, and this was Miami's lone opportunity in that late of the game. But Miami was able to capitalize. This was a 3-3 game with 2 minutes remaining in the game, which I just had to think. I didn't watch the whole time, but I definitely watched the last few minutes of it. And if I was a fan watching that game, I would be kicking myself the whole time. Because 3-3 tie game, it would be awesome if there was a tie game where it's 31-31 or 28-28, or a 3-point game where one has 31 and the other has 28. But not whenever it's 3-3. That's just boring. Defensive slugfest. Obviously, a lot of people say defense wins championships. I agree. But you got to have a good offense too, and that's what happened to Texas A&M. In the closing seconds actually, Texas A&M had their final chance of the game. It was 3rd and 5 in the red zone, 3rd and goal on the 5-yard line, and they just throw an interception. Marcel Reed makes, actually, well, no pun intended, but he makes the wrong read, and I don't even know if that's the right way to put it, because it was a good read. There was good separation between the receiver and the defender, but he just missed that throw by a few inches. And football is a game of inches sometimes, and that's one of the examples of it truly having that nature. And unfortunately for the Aggies, their whole season ends because who is a very, very, very good quarterback, Marcel Reed, just missed a pass by a few inches. 10-3 was the final score. I realize I didn't talk about the final games as much as the first one, Alabama versus Oklahoma. But these ones, I'm not going to lie, this college football weekend was not the best. However, as we look ahead in the looking ahead portion of the show, we have the quarterfinal matchups going. We have them. Now, that spread you can see in the lower third is the one presented by ESPN Bet or DraftKings. I don't know which one powers the ESPN website. I'll have to double check with the FanDuel lines, which I typically like to look at a little bit more. However, we are going to be talking we got to keep this show a little bit short. I like to keep them under 40 minutes. We're also going to be looking at what the BTN thinks about these games. So for this first matchup, Ohio State versus Miami, the BTN for the most part agrees with this spread. It has Ohio State favored by just 7.5 points. So that would indicate if you were to go on ESPN and buy the BTN spread, which is 7.5, favoring Ohio State, you would be picking, I don't do sports betting, but if you did, it would be picking, okay, I want Miami to cover that spread. I'm picking them to cover that spread because, BTN had them underdogged by just 7.5 points. Now it would be as simple as Ohio State scoring a touchdown and missing a field goal. To go up 10, and they missed the field goal and ended up winning by 9. Now that would be a bad beat, but if you pick Miami to cover, you could be very, very happy. Now the thing I'll say with this game is that if I'm Mario Cristobal, if I'm Carson Beck, if I'm Malachi Toney on that team, I would be worried. Because the thing with Ohio State and the thing that makes Ohio State different than Texas A&M is that you can't really get into a defensive slugfest like that unless you're on their level, right? I mean, you could use the claim, Indiana did that, but Indiana is significantly better than Miami. So I would say Indiana and Ohio State are far more comparable so they can have that defensive slugfest. However, if Miami wants to keep in this game, their best defense will be their offense. If I'm a Hurricanes fan and I'm watching this game and Ohio State goes up 10 points early, I would be worried. I would be worried because Ohio State has that explosive offense, whether Jeremiah Smith or Carnell Tate. Julian Sayin, incredibly accurate passer. They have those explosive tools, and that will be the key because it's as simple as Miami putting together a good defensive drive down 10 points, and then on 3rd and 4, Julian Sayin runs a play-action pass, boom, bomb down the field to Jeremiah Smith. And then you're down 17. And in the blink of an eye, you're down 3 scores. That's what could happen. Now, however, it doesn't have to go that way. I frankly, this isn't our formal preview show, so I don't have too many things to say about it. But I would be keying to Miami trying to get as many early points as possible. A win for Miami would be losing by 3 points going into halftime. That's what I would say, because they are staying in the game. You can't let Ohio State get too far ahead of you, because it's just going to be that harder to reel them back in. That's what Miami needs to do. Now, in the next game, the next matchup, we have as the software loads. In our next matchup, we have a game between Texas Tech and Oregon in the Orange Bowl. And this is one, it doesn't want to switch the graphic for some reason, but Texas Tech coming in here as the 4 seed. Texas Tech is the 4 seed, Oregon the 5 seed. This game is going to be incredibly close, and the BTN feels that ESPN actually got this pretty much right. It has Texas Tech. If the BTN was a traditional betting sports book, it would have this game listed as just an opportunity for you to pick the winner of the game and not give you the possibility to pick a money line, to pick the winner of the game whatsoever, because it just is that close. And so, like I said, Texas Tech is favored by 0.5 point according to the BTN. Like I said, kind of similar with Miami. Oregon has a better explosive offense than Texas Tech. However, their defense isn't as good as Texas Tech. So it's going to be truly just Oregon's best going up against Texas Tech's best, where offense on defense is going to be a great clash in favor of Oregon's offense. But for Jacob Rodriguez and Joey Maguire's unit on defense, going up against Oregon is going to be a challenge, one of the better offensives they've faced all year. But if you're Baron Morton, the quarterback for Texas Tech, I would be chomping at the bit, excited to play this game. And all of the offensive weapons that team has, they should be excited, because Oregon is probably, I'm not 100% sure about the defensive numbers, but they're not as on par with Texas Tech as some of the other teams they've played with this season are. Now, in our third to last matchup, we have a game between, in the Rose Bowl, Alabama and Indiana. Now, Indiana is favored by 6.5 points, according to ESPN. And I believe the BTN, for the most part, agrees with this spread. Or actually, no, it doesn't. Yeah, I just got that wrong. Indiana is favored by close to 2 touchdowns, according to the BTN, 13.5. Alabama fell a lot coming off of that loss to Georgia in the SEC championship game. So, and the BTN hasn't really let Alabama recover from that. And so they are still trying to, pick up steam to hopefully get back into the matchup. I don't formally agree with the BTN spread here. 13.5 seems a little bit, egregious, especially on a neutral field in a college football playoff environment. I think it is a little bit too ambitious for Indiana. However, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibilities. It'll be important to see, because Indiana does have a great defense, great rushing defense, great pass defense, especially looking at how they limited Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And I would be looking to see if Alabama is able to bring those explosive plays into Pasadena, California. Because if they can't, they don't have a good enough offense to stand and compete against Indiana's defense. And so that is important to know. Now, in the final game, Ole Miss versus Georgia. This is a rematch. Once again, I think my laptop is about to die, so the graphics are not updating. But this is the Sugar Bowl. And this is a matchup we've seen before. And a lot of times I've been talking to a lot of my friends, Drury and Friends, college football show. And we talk a lot about how hard it is to beat a team twice. And this will be the case for Georgia. Or ESPN has Georgia favored by 6.5 points currently. That could change, especially with the lines being generated a week out from the games themselves. But that will be, I don't think it will be that close. I mean, I think it will be even closer than that is. Where the BTN has the line generated at 3.5, still favoring Georgia, but not as dominantly as one may expect. Where it shows that Trinidad Chambliss is probably going to be limited a little bit. He's not going to have as great as an offensive performance against the Georgia defense as he has been able to earlier in the season, right? However, whenever they played that game earlier this fall, it was like an offensive chess match where they were just going back and forth, exchanging scores like no one's business, where no defense could stop each other. And, there was just nothing that was being said for either team's defenses. Now, I don't think that will be the case with this game. I think that game was early enough in the season. Got to plug my laptop in. I think that game was early enough in the season where, defenses weren't in their true identities. They weren't playing how they wanted to be playing up until that point in the season, where I think that is very, very important to know. Where, lost my train of thought. Where it's like, this is going to be a closer game, not because less points are going to be put up. I think that final score was 44-38 back in when they played that first matchup, and it will not be that close. That over-under will not be close to getting that high for this matchup. And so, with that, we've had a little bit of technical difficulties towards the end of this show. But guys, I just want to thank you so much for watching today's episode of the Drury and Friends College Football Show, our first episode. I hope to get some more episodes out soon before the quarterfinal matchups in the college football playoff. So, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for watching if you are watching right now. And once again, thank you so much. Have a good night.